and welcome to Conspiracize Me. I am now onto a new series of videos, topics to discuss. I want to just kind of hit on things that are kind of outlandish, conspiracies that people hold that are kind of cool to think about, but if you believe this, you might be looked at a little bit weird. The first outlandish conspiracy theory that I want to tackle is the simulation theory, that the natural world is really ones and zeros, and everything that we see has been made up and created and essentially projected. Computers can do some really awesome things. My phone, as small as it is, can suck up a lot of my time, and we use computers every day for nearly everything. It's a big part of our lives, but is it all of our lives? And that's what we're going to tackle here. I switched it up today for this one because I wanted the responses to be a little more tightly wound. I'm using Claude for this one, the AI. I just noticed that Claude gives me more of an essay type response, whereas ChatGPT will give me a bullet pointed, kind of sparsed out response. Let's see where this takes us. The simulation theory. Are we living inside a computer? The idea that reality might not be real is not new. In fact, it is ancient. The Greek philosopher Plato, writing around 380 BC, gave us the allegory of the cave, in which prisoners chained inside a cave spent their entire lives watching shadows on a wall, mistaking those shadows for reality. I remember reading The Cave. I remember thinking how silly these people are, because I'm on the outside looking in. I mean, that begs the question, is there anyone on the outside looking in on our lives as humans? Or, what may be even crazier to think about, are there any humans that are on the outside looking in to the rest of us, trying to figure it out, and they're standing there like, we've got it figured out already? When I think about that, I think of this one religion called Scientology, where they've got levels of enlightenment, and they're looking at us like, yeah, I ain't got it figured out. There are levels to life. Moving on. They have no idea that a fuller, truer world exists behind them. It is one of the earliest recorded attempts by a human mind to grapple with the possibility that what we perceive as real might be nothing more than a projection. Centuries later, in 1641, the French philosopher René Descartes pushed the idea even further with his concept of the evil demon, a thought experiment in which he imagined a supremely powerful deceiver feeding him false sensory experiences, making him believe in a world that did not actually exist. Well, that is deranged, to think that this world is a projection fed to you by a demon. I mean, how hard of a life do you have to live to think that your life experience was fed to you by a being from the darkness? These were philosophical exercises, but they planted a seed that would eventually grow into one of the most discussed scientific and philosophical debates of the modern era. I don't think I've ever debated anyone on this, or really even heard people debate on this. I've heard it talked about on podcasts and stuff, very faintly. Maybe it's the circles that I run in don't really talk about things like this. The simulation theory as we know it today, however, it did not take its current form until 2003, fairly recent, when Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom published a paper titled "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" in the journal Philosophical Quarterly. Bostrom's argument was not mystical or science fiction. It was a cold, logical trilemma. He proposed that one of three things must be true. I would like to hear what this means. Either virtually all civilizations go extinct before reaching the technological capability to run realistic simulations of their ancestors, or virtually all technologically advanced simulations simply lose interest in running such simulations, or we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation right now. I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't understand anything that I just read, so I need to go back and reread that. Okay, I reread that again, and I still don't understand what it means, and I read it very slowly, so I'm just going to keep reading and hopefully something sticks. His reasoning was straightforward. If even one advanced civilization in the history of the universe ever reached the point where it could run millions of ancestor simulations, then the number of simulated realities would vastly outnumber the one base reality. Statistically speaking, the odds would overwhelmingly favor us being in a simulation rather than the original. Bostrom did not claim we were definitely simulated. He simply argued that the logic was difficult to escape. If we're going to simplify that at all, it's the fact that this guy Bostrom from Oxford believes that there's a high chance that we're in a simulation. He believes that technology has gotten to the point where we've made ourselves up. I don't think we have enough technology to to outdo the natural world. I think there's more natural, even this day and age, than there is technology. The paper exploded in academic and tech circles, and by the mid-2000s, it had crossed over into mainstream conversation. Elon Musk famously declared at a 2016 tech conference that he believed the odds of us living in base reality were 1 in billions. So Elon Musk thinks that we're all ones and zeros. Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the most respected science communicators in the world, said at a symposium that he thought the probability was very high, perhaps 50-50. That's not very high. 50-50? When I think of very high, I don't think of 50-50. This guy's essentially saying, I don't know. You say the probability is very high, but ultimately what you're saying is you don't know when you say it's 50-50. When figures of that profile start taking an idea seriously, it stops being fringe almost overnight. Just because they are high-profile figures does not make this true, but they did put the idea on the map. What makes simulation theory so uniquely captivating is that it sits at the exact crossroads of science, philosophy, and spirituality. Yeah, that's a big one, spirituality. I mean, you can say, even science, if you just scientifically try to prove that we're in a simulation, I think you'd be wrong 100% of the time. Philosophically, you can claim that we are in a simulation, and you can make so many claims sound so good. Philosophy is just, you can't go one way or the other. That's truly 50-50. Science, I think you can debunk that we're in a simulation pretty easily. But if everything makes sense, if scientifically you can dig down deep and show that everything makes sense and it's too clean, well then, okay, I guess you can either say we're in a simulation where everything is just too clean, or you can say that there's a creator and it's not a simulation. It's been created by an intellectual being. Or are we saying that the simulation has been created by a sentient mechanical being? But then you got to go back and say, well, how did the mechanical being get here? Did everything start out natural and then turn into machinery? And now machinery has taken over the natural? Did everything start with Mother Nature and now Mother Nature has been usurped by Mother Technology? But if we think about this, the only natural being that could have created technology are human beings. And I guess the question is, and this is probably going further than the scope of this video, the question is, where did humans come from? If you needed humans to create technology, where did humans come from? Humans could not have come from technology. So we could not have started in a simulation if a simulation depends upon technology to simulate it, okay? So humans came about first. So we had to get to the point where we could create technology, create simulation, and then simulation takes over and what, rewinds history? But if you're going to rewind history and we're in a simulation, why would you rewind it and play it back and keep all of the messed up things that are currently in existence? If we were in a simulation, I would think that there would be a lot better outcomes. Because if you're going to go back and rewind, that's what a simulation is, right? I mean, if you need the human to create the technology that's going to simulate, and the simulation then is going to go back and rewind and create a whole new reality. This reality should be better than the previous one, unless we're saying that the previous reality was way worse. I mean, it's quite clear that if we're in a simulation and we're experiencing so many bad, offbeat things that are happening in the world, even today, it seems like the world is getting worse. It's not getting better. If we were in a simulation, don't you think we'd be much smarter? We'd have figured things out, and we'd be in a much better place, mentally, emotionally. Like, we'd have figured out community. We would have figured it out. The only thing that would make sense if we're in a simulation and the world is as bad as it is today is if certain people have the knowledge that we're in a simulation and they're using that knowledge as power to create their crazy, havoc-filled world. And so I guess part of the conspiracy theory that you could consider is only a certain few people know that we're in a simulation, and those certain few people have to, by design, be in power. If you know it, then you're in power. And you could say, whoa, Elon Musk, a billionaire. Of course, he owns so many powerful companies. It makes sense that he would be one of the few to know that we're in a simulation. If we were in a simulation, I think he'd have figured out a way to get to Mars by now. And I guess that's where this whole AI race is going. I think the AI race is about who can create this machinery that can figure things out the fastest. And the question is, what are we trying to figure out? I mean, AI can write some beautiful poetry. It can figure out math equations quickly. It can create new things or put together seemingly new things. What is the end game when it comes to AI? When it comes to simulation, what is the purpose of it? So I think we can rack our brain and try to figure out if we're in a simulation. But the fact of the matter is, we don't really seem to be much better off being in a simulation. It only seems like torture if we are in a simulation, because then what? Somebody has the power over us and can repeat our life, can press rewind at any point, can cause anything to happen to us. Being in power and being able to push buttons is one thing, but does anyone have the levers to our souls? To me, what's more convincing than a simulation is that our natural world is impacted by a spiritual dimension. If you think we're in a simulation, maybe the question isn't, is our world made up of computers? Is it ones and zeros? Are we just a concept? I think the real question, a better question, perhaps more intriguing, is how much is our natural world affected and impacted by a world that we don't see, a second world, an alternative world, a spiritual world? And honestly, humans are very intuitive, but we are also very blind. We get inklings, we get feelings, we get close to the answer, but we also don't land on the right answer a lot of times. And I think a lot of times we don't even act on our inklings as well. We miss a lot of opportunities. But what I'm saying is, for those who think that we live in a simulation, what if the intuition is getting there, but the idea or the answer isn't the simulation? The answer is a spiritual world, a spiritual reality. There is something to life that we can't see that has a heavy impact on our natural world. And that's got to be the spiritual world, the spiritual realm. There are people who claim to see things that they've never seen before. It's got to be aliens. It's got to be a simulation. It's got to be my eyes playing tricks on me. What if it's true that people have seen things that are unexplainable, perhaps scary, perhaps mysterious, and it's a glimpse of the spiritual world making itself visible temporarily? And perhaps, just like humans have a very distinct role amongst everything else that is created on this earth that we can see. Humans have minds, we can reason, create things, communicate, build up civilizations, build up our communities. We live by a code. Just like humans have that distinct ability amongst everything else around us. What if there is a being in the spiritual world that has that ability? What if the spiritual world likewise is full of all sorts of different creatures, but there's a certain type, certain line, certain lineage of creatures that can do what the others can't? And part of that is making themselves visible in the physical, natural realm for a time, or at any time it pleases. What if there are portals available in the spiritual world that can zap them temporarily into the natural world? So when we talk about, are we in a simulation, maybe the better question is, can the spiritual world tap into the natural world, and vice versa? Can the natural world tap into the spiritual world? Can the two communicate? At the very least, if there's no communication, there's impact. Something happens in the spiritual world, it has to impact what happens in the physical world. And I wonder if what happens in the physical world likewise impacts the spiritual world. If they both communicate without knowing they're communicating, or if they both communicate and they know they're communicating, but the communication just doesn't sound or look the same. Like, we can say words, and those words have impacts in the spiritual realm, but in the spiritual realm, they're not communicated as words. Maybe it shows up somehow else. Maybe it creates things, it forms things, but it doesn't show up as words. Maybe it shows up as something else. I don't know what that something else is. But I wonder, the same way, if in the spiritual world, they do something, they say something, they act in a certain way, how does that show up in the physical world? It's all about translations. How does the spiritual realm's activity translate into or manifest itself in the physical world? And how does the physical world activity manifest itself in the spiritual world? So I think I started this episode on simulations. Are we living in a simulation? And I don't even think I need to go as far as to read all of this to try and conspiracize myself into, yeah, we do, or no, we don't. I don't think I have to go that far. I do not think that we live in a simulation. I think we live in a tension between the physical and the spiritual world. And what we think is a simulation is actually our inclination that there is a spiritual world, there's a spiritual impact, there's a spiritual weight that rests upon us here in this physical world, and we don't know what the manifestations are, but there is something. Let me continue reading this and see if we can get anything. What makes simulation theory so uniquely captivating is that it sits at the exact crossroads of science, philosophy, and spirituality. For scientists and mathematicians, it raises genuinely testable questions about the nature of the universe. For philosophers, it resurrects the oldest human questions: what is real? For people of faith, it offers a surprisingly comfortable parallel: the idea of a creator who designed and runs a reality we inhabit is not entirely unlike traditional religious concepts of God. The theory manages to speak to almost every kind of mind, which is rare, and that is a large part of why it refuses to go away. On the scientific side, the question has been taken seriously enough that researchers have actually attempted to test it. In 2012, physicists at the University of Washington, led by Silas Bean, proposed that if we are living inside a simulation, the simulation would almost certainly be built on a kind of lattice structure, a grid at the smallest possible scale, similar to how modern computer simulations work. If that lattice exists, it would impose a detectable limit on the energy of cosmic rays. Remarkably, scientists have already observed something called the GZK limit, a puzzling cutoff point in the energy of cosmic rays that arrive on Earth. Bean and his team argued this could be consistent with the kind of constraint a simulation would produce. It is not proof, but it is a kind of coincidence that makes physicists pause. More recently, in 2022, theoretical physicist Melvin Vopson at the University of Portsmouth proposed what he called the second law of infodynamics, arguing that information in the universe behaves in ways consistent with data optimization, exactly what you would expect if a programmer were trying to run a universe efficiently. He has called this potential evidence that reality is, at its core, informational rather than physical. They seem to be suggesting that certain realities seem to fit like puzzle pieces. They connect too perfectly to have just been randomized. And I think that's right. And I think that science, if you allow science to do its thing, it will show you that life is not random, that life fits together like a puzzle, that there is a logical, thought out way that the world works. I think it'd be beneficial, and I'm speaking to myself as well, for everyone to read into some scientific breakthroughs and see how well this world is put together, like a hand in a glove, as if history is not random, but it is linear, and it's taking us to something like a conclusion. Like there is a beginning and there is an end, and everything in between is leading up to it. It's not like there are multiple endings. It's just randomized and you don't know what's going to happen at the end. It seems to be linear. I think that's the conclusion that anybody would come to if they took science seriously, read a textbook, read some findings. You would see that as superiorly logical as human beings are on this planet, even more so, there must be a superior logical mind than ours in the spiritual world. If we are superior logic in the natural world, there must be an even more superior logic in the spiritual world, because history seems to point to a beginning and an end, and we're getting there. Moving on, then there are the so-called glitches. This is where the theory gets genuinely eerie. People across the world report experiences they describe as moments where reality seemed to stutter or repeat. The most well-known of these is the phenomena of déjà vu, that deeply unsettling feeling that you have lived through an exact moment before. In The Matrix, the film that arguably did more than any academic paper to introduce simulation theory to a mass audience, déjà vu is literally explained as a glitch in the simulation, and that framing stuck in the cultural imagination for good reason. Beyond déjà vu, there are more specific phenomena that conspiracy communities and simulation theories point to. The Mandela effect, named after the widespread false memory that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, refers to large groups of people sharing identical incorrect memories. Things like misremembering the Monopoly Man as having a monocle, or believing that Bernstein Bears was spelled Bernstein. Theories argue these collective memory errors suggest that simulation was patched or edited at some point, and not everyone's memory updated correctly. Quantum mechanics itself has been cited as a potential glitch of sorts. The famous double slit experiment shows that particles behave differently when they are being observed versus when they are not, as if the universe is only rendering what is being looked at exactly the way a video game engine works to conserve processing memory or processing power. Physicist John Wheeler actually proposed something he called the participatory universe, suggesting that reality requires an observer to exist, which sounds less like physics and more like a programmer cutting corners on rendering. Okay, I think we've all experienced deja vu. I think we've all been through several moments in our life where we feel like we've relived something, like this has happened before, this is strange. I did this before. That's unexplainable. I mean, honestly, whenever I feel that, I think it's super weird that I feel like I've seen this before. And I don't know if it's because I didn't get enough sleep. Maybe I had too much coffee that day. I have no idea. Maybe oddly I dreamed something, and then I feel like I'm living in my dream. So I've been through this before. I don't know what it is. There's certainly parts of life that feel very strange. And the Bernstein Bears thing, yeah, I thought for sure it was spelled with an E-I-N. All of a sudden spelled with an A-I-N? But that being said, that is strange. That is somewhat illogical. For those who believe in this simulation thing, I'm not trying to debunk it. that is strange, and if anything, I'll concede a point to you that seems very simulated. But all in all, I think it's more of a physical and a spiritual dynamic than it is a simulation. There have also been stranger, harder to explain incidents. In 2016, a video circulated widely online appearing to show dozens of birds frozen mid-flight above a town square, completely motionless in the air, before suddenly resuming normal movement. Whether authentic or fabricated, it captured millions of people's attention because it looked exactly like a simulation briefly hanging before catching up. Reports of spontaneous, identical behavior in large groups of strangers, moments where an entire crowd seems to pause or act in uncanny unison, get filed under the same category. None of these are scientifically verified glitches, but they feed something very human, the instinct that occasionally the seams of reality show. Yeah, that's very weird. Birds frozen in the sky, if you videoed that, it seems like maybe that was doctored. But the fact that a group of people can act in unison, that also is very strange. And it could be a flash mob type of a thing. We just get a bunch of people together and you say, hey, at this time, look at your watch, and at a certain time, we're all going to do the same thing at one time. It'll be weird. It's going to weird people out. And there you go. And if that's not the case, and that actually did happen, where everybody, like strangers, truly did something in unison, that's very strange. But you're telling me that that can't happen one time in the thousands of years that people are on this earth? That can't happen one time? I don't know. What the simulation theory ultimately cannot do, at least not yet, is prove itself. The fundamental problem is that any test we design to detect the simulation would itself be running inside the simulation, making it nearly impossible to get outside it and look back. It is the cave problem all over again. You cannot see the projector if you are one of the shadows on the wall. Some physicists argue the theory is not even falsifiable, which by the standards of the scientific method means it does not qualify as science at all, just philosophy wearing a lab coat. Others like Bostrom and Vopson insist we are getting closer to testable predictions. So yeah, the simulation theory can't be tested, because by trying to test it, it's the simulation testing itself. Whether the simulation theory is true or not, what it has undeniably done is force serious people, scientists, philosophers, and everyday humans alike, to sit with a deeply uncomfortable question. What if everything you have ever seen, touched, felt, and known is simply very convincing code? And what if the fact that you are even able to ask that question is itself part of the program? I have not been conspiracized to believe that we are in a simulation. If anything, I have even further strongly cemented my belief that this is the natural world. The natural world is impacted by the spiritual world, and I do believe that we have impact on each other. What happens here impacts what happens there. What happens there impacts what happens here. And there is a communication, a manifestation that we don't understand, but it's real. So make of that what you will. I've come to the conclusion that there's no simulation. There's only history going from start to finish, and for however long you have on this earth, you are part of that fabric. You are part of the stitching that is taking this world through to its completion. I don't know when that completion is, but when you get to the completion, there's going to be an infusing between the natural and the spiritual world that we've never seen before. What happens then, nobody's experienced. I think at that time, and potentially that time alone, is what is going to fully and finally debunk the simulation conspiracy theory. Until then, live your life knowing that you are part of this fabric of history, taking things on to its completion. So if you haven't already, find some purpose and get after it. Thanks for watching.